Today as speaker, we have Ali Raza Jillani. Ali Bhai is a colleague from Pakistan. He is associated with Karachi Research Chair. Karachi Research Chair engages with a range of issues from climate and sustainability to infrastructure and to geopolitics in the region. We have Sharif Jamil ji from Bangladesh Poribesh Andolan, Udhav Pyakurel ji from Nepal, Harban Kumara from Sri Lanka. We are joined by Soumya Datta ji, Dada as we all call him. Dada is also advisory board member of Climate Technology Center and Network, United Nations CTCN.
We need to talk about South Asia. We can't talk about climate governance and climate crisis management for Bangladesh, or climate governance for India, or climate governance for Nepal or Pakistan. If India keeps on doing projects on water management to tackle climate change, then crores and crores of people in Bangladesh and Pakistan will suffer. The three things that tie us together in South Asia: the Himalayas, the three seas, and the southwest monsoon, and the cultural closeness. So we have to have an effective climate governance in South Asia. We'll have to plan for South Asia. Those kind of things can be better done in a South Asian framework, because these three natural integrators don't make any difference between where Bangladesh's border with India is or India's border with Nepal is.
Thank you very much, Soumya-ji. I think you've set the stage for us to actually see environmental issues and climate change as a deeply political and ethical issue concerning equity and justice. Except North and Central Asia, the Asian region is heading in the wrong direction on Goal 13, which specifically deals with climate action. Among the five rocking the bottom in environmental performance, we have three from South Asia, where you have Bangladesh at 179th, India at 177th, and Nepal at 176th. Imagine the scale of populations in this particular region. But what's surprising is, despite all of these pressing factors in front of us, the lack of political will on environmental governance is, something which is deafening.
Of course, there are unilateral interventions that are not properly addressed in the regional frameworks. SARC is inactive and BIMSTEC coming up. BRI is there for China. So there are many global and regional dimensions in terms of trade and commerce. But what we are watching in terms of climate change and the impact on these regional resources, from Sundarbans to Himalayan glacier, everywhere there is vivid adverse impact of climate change.
We critical masses, we civil society, we civic movement are also not keeping updated, not keeping priority of this regional integration. That is why it has become only this rhetoric, and we have to strengthen it.
Climate change is at the heart of so-called global social contract that we see SDGs as. I think we need to move ahead of political intricacies and issues to actually come together and try to safeguard our collective future.
Now the denial have come into a new form. Not that climate change is not happening, which was a major component till the 2010s. But the denial now today is coming that, okay, we cannot really change over the entire system which is needed from fossil fuels to renewables. Not only that, our economic system itself has fundamental flaws in that. But we can tackle that by involving large-scale technological interventions in the governance architecture. We'll have large geoengineering projects. We have very large actions, ocean fertilization, or sending millions and tons of sulfates into the stratosphere. This kind of untested, very dangerous technological intervention is also being integrated more and more.
A different sort of evidence from the South Asian region indicates that you have climate change, biodiversity loss, and an air and water pollution, which are some of the key challenges pressed by extraction, processing, distribution, and use of fossil fuels, which are the major contributors for environmental pollution and greenhouse gas emissions. There's no sense of accountability, but there's also an indication of massive human rights violations on that front, which is basically turned a blind eye to.
Drastically, the industrial activities that has been going on in the coastal area already created a huge cumulative impact that will put the marginalized people more marginalized or displaced or losing their livelihoods. And of course, it has impact in the national food security and regional stability and all these things.
There's no data for almost like 60% of the environmental indicators across the Asian Pacific countries, which is horrific because in the absence of data, then, formulation of any policies with that lack of evidence would be virtually impossible.
Imperatives of GDP growth actually is dominating most other consideration. So that's a major stumbling block in doing any kind of climate action which focuses on safety. When you think of economic development, generally the gains accrue to a handful. Whereas if you reduce the risks of climate crisis or any other ecological crisis, those benefit goes to everyone in that entire ecosystem. So our governance systems have been continuously trying to maximize some benefits, even from climate governance, and thereby putting this into the hands of a few, selected few, the empowered and the rich. Whereas at the same time, harming the interest of the multitude.
The fossil fuels such as oil, gas, and coal with massive environmental degradation potential. State policy space to actually counter these measures is monopolized by neoliberal, trade agreements, which continue to sustain the use of fossil fuels at the expense of people and planet. The fracking technology they're using in mining for these fossil fuels causes earthquakes. It pollutes the water table. It produces hazardous chemicals with several health complications, even cancers. And yet the communities are kept in dark.
When we listen to some of our political leaders' statements that because of petty political difference, we'll try to close down Sindh river's flow, we not only laugh in the incredulity of the impossibility of the statements, how do you do it in that Himalayan region, but also the inhuman nature that almost an entire country depends on the one river. And political leaders who are supposed to look at people can talk about shutting down the river.
The establishment of a regional environmental entity at the Asia Pacific vis-a-vis at the sub-regional level to support environmental and social impact assessment agencies across countries to enhance safety and accountability standards at the national level. Then one of the key factors that this could achieve is better negotiating Paris Agreement principles for equity and common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities outcome for the South Asian and then at large the Asian Pacific region, where we're facing a lot of challenges.
We must realize that our climate, our ecological functions are all tied together. And if we do not plan taking all these factors together, not within our political boundaries, political nation-state boundaries only, because this is one problem where a nation-state approach cannot have a clear solution for climate governance in South Asia. There we have to bring back the forums and the mechanisms where South Asian governments, nations can sit together. Until that happens, I think as South Asian civil society, as South Asian people's movements, we have a big role in building up this cooperation between our civil societies, between our peoples, so that within the countries, within the nation states, political pressure also builds up, that the governments realize that there is not only a natural need, there is a political imperative that they cooperate.
The governance of global environmental commons, or even at the regional level, should focus on safeguarding a stable and resilient Earth system for long-term well-being of humans and species altogether, which then, of course, requires stronger public sector commitment to begin with in terms of appropriate policies and regulations where you have Polluters Pay Act, you have a removal of harmful subsidies, you have progressive carbon taxation.
Climate change governance in South Asia is still an issue of theoretical or academic discussion. Even sometimes it comes in the policy making process, it does not come that far to propose or prepare any comprehensive action plan where all these South Asian nations can work together.
It should be a holistic approach, regional approach to combat with kind of crisis we have. And if there is nothing, then, for example, Nepal may not be bothered about fishery rights, and Sri Lanka may not be bothered about Himalaya and glacier melting, but eventually all will be affected by either of these.
Climate public expenditure and institutional review, a constitutional instrument at the national level under Paris Agreement, needs to be pushed at the sub-regional, regional and global level, so that we could basically, track not just the Global North's commitment to financing, technical and technological support for developing countries, but also their ability to actually walk the talk.
How to sort of communicate the sense of crisis to the mainstream policy planners, political leaders, what kind of strategies we adopt
I think it should start with sensitization at the grassroots and public level. At the national level, democratize the spaces of engagement with the government to not just, bring that evidence forward from the civil society, but to lead the way in terms of, what should be done in line with international best practices. At the regional and global level, I think it's not within the policy space of an individual government to counter neoliberal patterns. We've seen so many ISDS cases. Most of our countries are, trapped by one or the other multinational corporation. So there has to be some sort of mechanism at the intergovernmental level where we could potentially, try and hold these multinational corporations accountable, mainly responsible for environmental degradation.
Political leadership should have that sensitization or that motivation to believe in their capacity and to believe in the realities of this South Asian subcontinent or Indian subcontinent. We need to translate those narratives into people's life, and then we need to include them with our efforts that we are doing in maybe policy making process, in the dialogue, in seminar and all these things. We need to bring those things to the community level. And when community will understand the reason of their water scarcity, when community will understand the reason of their food security, when a fisherman will understand the adverse impact of mercury pollution to the water body, then the changes will be coming up.